We have Saurabh Bedi from the University of Zurich.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. We are constantly interacting with a probabilistic and uncertain world, and these probabilities have an inherent structure that underlies them. That is, they are naturally bounded between 0 and 1. Today, I'll show you that this naturally bounded structure of probabilities predictably alters our behaviors and gives rise to the well-known phenomena of probability distortions. So what are probability distortions? It's seen that when individuals are making decisions under risk and uncertainty, they do not necessarily treat probabilities linearly, and instead they behave as if they overweigh small probabilities and underweigh large probabilities. Now, Kahneman and Tversky described this phenomenon with the help of this classic characteristic probability distortion function in their Nobel Prize-winning work on prospect theory. But what gives rise to this pattern? Recently, there have been attempts at trying to explain the emergence of this phenomenon by treating the brain as an information processing channel that arrives at inferred probability estimates through a two-stage process of first encoding these probabilities into noisy representations and then decoding these representations. These recent accounts have tried to explain for these distortions in final probability estimates by essentially assuming that either the encoding occurs under a distorted log-odd space or that the decoding occurs under with a distorted centrally shaped prior. So essentially, these existing models shift this described probability distortion pattern to assumed forms of distortions at the encoding or the decoding stage. Here, we propose that this reliance on very specific assumptions on distortion patterns at the encoding or decoding stage is not necessary to produce the major patterns in probability distortions. And essentially, it arises because what's being inferred here are probabilities, which are these bounded quantities. And these boundaries interact with noise during the inference process, truncating them and giving rise to repulsions of noise away from the boundaries, thereby repelling noise upwards for small probabilities because of this lower boundary at 0, and repelling noise downwards for large probabilities because of this upward boundary at 1. And this is what gives rise to the probability weighting function. And the mechanisms for this are rooted in two prominent theories from neuroscience. That is, if the encoding stage follows efficient encoding, or if the decoding stage follows Bayesian decoding. Both of them independently will give rise to this, and irrespective of a lot of assumptions on functional forms on the encoding or the decoding stage. So zooming in at the encoding stage, we have a more rigorous proof to show that this efficient encoding will lead to these repulsions of noise away from the boundaries, but here I'll try to give an intuition. So essentially, efficient coding can be formalized as having limited or bounded representational resources that the brain has to encode probabilities, and that the brain then uses these limited resources that it has as efficiently as possible. And so it essentially suggests that the whole span of representational resources that are available to the brain are going to be used, and for things that are encoded at the boundaries, probabilities that are encoded at the boundaries, noise can only go inwards because that is the range of support that it has over representations, over limited representations. And that leads to this repulsion of noise inwards because of efficient coding. Zooming in at the second stage, which is the decoding stage. So even if the representations that are coming in after encoding are not truncated and don't have any structure to them, even if it's completely Gaussian, symmetric, still, simply by applying Bayes' rule over the fact that what's being decoded are bounded quantities, and irrespective of what shape there is, the posterior now, because of the multiplication of this bounded prior and the likelihood, will be truncated, and then that will lead to this repulsions of noise inwards. So essentially, irrespective of whether there's efficient coding or Bayesian decoding, both of them independently give rise to these patterns. And here we just simulated it for different shapes of the priors, for all bounded priors, and all of them will lead to this overestimation and underestimation pattern that then explains probability distortions. So now what we did is we went in and we did 3 pre-registered experiments where we manipulated both boundaries and cognitive noise over probabilities, the 2 factors that we suggest cause the probability distortion pattern, and changing them should completely alter the pattern. And this was done across 2 domains. One, risky lottery valuations, where this is traditionally found, the probability distortion pattern, but also in simple perceptual judgments of estimation of probabilities. Okay, so how did we do the risky lottery valuation task? People walked into the lab, they saw these lotteries that gave them different probability chances for winning a fixed amount of 50 experimental currency units. So we didn't change the amount from trial to trial. The only thing that changed were the probabilities, and they had to indicate what valuation these lotteries had, what was their maximum willingness to pay. And within subjects design then, we manipulated both cognitive noise, that was done by changing the complexity of the underlying fractions, and the boundaries, which is within which, so essentially the ranges within which these probabilities varied from block to block, and they were explicitly told of that. So in some blocks, they only saw probabilities between 0 and 0.5. In other blocks, they saw probabilities between 0.5 and 1. So we added this contextually induced boundary at 0.5 by doing this. And therefore, on the left are the simulations. So as expected, the black curve shows the probability distortion pattern when people see probabilities bounded between 0 and 1. And what we predict is that by inducing this boundary at 0.5, we should be able to create a double distortion pattern because of this added boundary repulsions. And this is exactly what we found in the data. On the bottom is what we predicted, that there should be jumps in valuations within the same individuals just by inducing this boundary. And this is also, we induced almost a 15% jump in lottery valuations within individuals. Then we replicated this experiment for risky lottery valuation with 2 added boundaries instead of 1, again to emphasize the point that it doesn't have anything to do with small or large probabilities per se or specific encoding functions, but just changing boundaries changes the distortion pattern itself. And then we replicated this for simple perceptual estimation, so that to show domain generality across low-level perception and high-level risky decision making with 2 added boundaries. And in both cases, again, we replicated these jumps in valuation by the presence of the boundaries and jumps in estimated probability estimations because of the presence of boundary. Existing accounts that rely on very specific forms of distortions assume that the encoding or the decoding stage cannot account for these jumps that we could introduce, changes in distortion functions that we introduced. In summary, we proposed a noisy inference account of probabilities distortions because they are bounded, that is rooted in benchmark theories of efficient encoding at the encoding stage or Bayesian decoding at the decoding stage. And we confirmed all of our pre-registered hypotheses, out of which I showed you one, that is adding boundaries adds distortions. But if you come to the poster tomorrow, I can show you that adding noise increases these distortions, and adding boundaries also changes the variability patterns within subjects as predicted by the account. Also, what we can talk about more at the poster is whether these effects arise at the encoding stage or the decoding stage, because they have dissociable behavioral signatures depending on where they occur. Finally, I would like to thank my lab, the team, all the funding sources, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. We again have time for one question. Is there a question over there? Yes.
Thanks, that was a really cool talk. I was just wondering, I mean, how did the subjects learn about these boundaries, especially when you had multiple?
Yeah, so they were explicitly instructed. They were just told before the block that you're going to see probabilities until.
Excellent. Let's thank Saurabh again. And with that, we're moving on to Katarzyna from the University of Birmingham. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, my name is Dudzikowska. I'm from University of Birmingham, and today I would like to talk to you about 2 subjective experiences that very often determine what we do and when we do it. So confidence in ability to succeed and how tired we are, fatigue. So typically confidence is framed as internal readout of probability of success. Typically this is modeled as a representation of evidence for correct. For perceptual tasks, For perceptual tasks, that's quality of sensor input, strength of memory trace for metamemory, or for something more skill-based, previous experience. So how often did I manage to land this in the past? But what if the success hinges not on brains, but on pure brawn? Following the same line of thinking, we should expect that as we repeat the same effortful activity over and over again, our confidence in being able to do it again and again and again should quickly reach the ceiling and stay there, right? But if you just cycled across 1,100 lovely Amsterdam bridges, your confidence and ability to get through the remaining 100 or so just does not feel like a given, does it? You might say, yeah, because I'm exhausted now, and in fact, fatigue might have something to do with it. So in a previous study, Greenhouse and colleagues demonstrated that in a fatigued state, induced by an earlier upper body workout, participants had decreased confidence in their capacity to perform high-intensity leg exercise compared to when they were rested. That is despite the fact that their motivation and their actual capacity to do so did not change. But in examining fatigue development a little bit more closely, trial by trial, over the course of effortful activity in our lab, we showed that fatigue is far from this tired versus not tired dichotomy, and it can ebb and flow throughout the task. And so in light of this, we asked, what are the moment-to-moment dynamics of effort confidence during a prolonged physical activity which is effortful enough to induce tiredness, but also doable enough that performance doesn't actually suffer? So as participants experience repeated successful outcomes, will they become and stay highly confident? Or as the fatigue goes up, will confidence drop with it? And to test this, we employed a task where we asked participants to do a grip exercise over and over again for around an hour. A little bit cruel, I know. And the crux of the design was this. Participants sees a cue, which is signifying upcoming effort level, and that's 30, 39, or 48% of individually calibrated before the task maximum contraction. And then they have to squeeze the hand grip device for at least 3 out of 5 second window at or above the indicated level, and if successful, they are rewarded with a completely random number of points. On 20% of the trials, they still saw the cue, but instead they were surprised, instead of exerting effort, they were surprised by a short break, 5 seconds of doing nothing. They still received the reward for this. Crucially, after every single one of the 120 trials in the study, after showing the cue, we asked them, how confident are you that you are able to achieve this effort requirement right now? They rated their confidence between 0, not at all confident, and 100, extremely confident. And we also ran 2 alternative versions of this design. So in the second version, they rated confidence on 50% of the trials, and on another half, they explicitly rated how tired are you feeling in this moment. And also realizing that fatigue and boredom often go hand in hand, we ran another version where, apart from confidence, participants rated their boredom. So what do we find? The results show, first of all, that confidence does indeed drop over the course of the task, especially regarding the highest effort level, so here in purple. It starts off lower, even though perfectly within the capacity, and drops more steeply as time goes on. And this was replicated in all 3 versions of the study. Furthermore, we also show that confidence changes dynamically with the exerted effort. So here I show how change in confidence, that is the current confidence rating minus the last rating given for the same effort level, depends on the level of the effort exerted on previous trial. So confidence drops significantly after high effort, unlike after low effort and rest. And this differential impact of effort was replicated across all versions of the study. However, in study 1, we also saw a significant rebound in confidence after rest, but this was not replicated. And you might also remember that I collected explicit ratings of tiredness in one version of the task. And this allows me to show you this lovely pattern, which is basically confidence and fatigue being near mirror images of one another. So confidence goes down as fatigue goes up, and as over the course of the trials, and also in terms of the change depending on exerted effort. I don't think I need to convince anyone here that these kind of moment-to-moment dynamics are very nice to look at with computational modeling. And here I wanted to see if these computational dynamics of fatigue can help explain the changes in confidence. So in previous research in our lab, we've repeatedly shown that fatigue is best described as a sum of two latent components. And that is recoverable fatigue, which increases in proportion to exerted effort, but can also partially dissipate with short breaks. And the unrecoverable component, which also increases with exerted effort, but does not recover with a brief rest. So in my computational model, I included the estimates of latent fatigue in the models of trial-by-trial confidence ratings. The best fit of observed confidence ratings was obtained through a model with only unrecoverable fatigue state. So the unrecoverable fatigue state increases by the level of exerted effort, which is scaled by the free parameter, which describes individual fatigability rate, and after rest, it remains unchanged. Then the change in unrecoverable fatigue is used to update the confidence estimate on each trial. This is then scaled by the difficulty of anticipated effort to reflect the steeper decline of confidence at higher effort levels. This model won both in terms of sum of BAC across participants and incidence probability, and in all three versions of the study. And I compared this model with estimates from models with different definitions of fatigue, and also with fatigue agnostic model, which was based purely on experienced outcomes. So in conclusion, effort confidence is susceptible to fluctuations in fatigue, but while fatigue can partially recover after a brief break, confidence does not recover with it. And I would like to thank my brilliant motivation and social neuroscience lab, particularly the wonderful Nikita Mehta, who helped collect the data, and my very supportive supervisor, Professor Matthew Apps, participants who pushed through fatigue for science. And if you have any lingering questions, I'm very happy to answer them now, or if there's no time, tomorrow at the posta C22. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Katarzyna. We again have time for one question from the audience.
Hi, very cool. Maybe you showed it, but did the actual performance or the physical ability also scale with this confidence? So is the, let's say, metacognitive ability also affected by fatigue, or is it just that people get worse and they're able to detect that they get worse?
So in terms of metacognitive ability, I cannot really show it because there is just not enough failures. So that's the thing, like people don't really fail at the task. It kind of stays. There might be a slight drop, but I also have shown that even in people who never failed, which is actually the majority of participants, or people who only fail like once, this confidence effect is still dropping, still happens. But in terms of metacognitive efficiency, if I don't have any failures, I can't really tell.
Confidence bias then?
Yeah.
Stays the same, but you think you can't do it anymore?
I suspected it, but to actually know this, I would have to be able to fit the, the signal detection theory models, which maybe I will at some point further work.
Okay. Should we do that? Should we move the other speaker?
We have some technical difficulties with this computer, so maybe Jessica, would you mind coming ahead? Thank you so much. Okay.
Sorry for the
Totally fine. Yes, so in that case, our next speaker is going to be Jessica Passlack from the University of Edinburgh. Thank you so much. Cool. Very good. Okay, take it away.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Jess, and today I'm going to be telling you about a project I've been working on with Maria Eckstein at DeepMind, where we've been looking at whether a single general strategy can support flexible behavior in response to both gradual and sudden changes. And so at the beginning of this project, we asked the question of how we can flexibly adjust our behavior in this ever-changing world that we live in. And so there are many different kinds of changes that we need to adapt to. One major distinction in them is whether they occur gradually or suddenly. So, for example, as the seasons change, we gradually need to adjust how we dress. However, if there's a sudden storm that appears, we more suddenly need to change what we're wearing. So despite there being a lot of interest in these two different kinds of adaptation tasks in behavioral flexibility, they are usually studied independently of one another using distinct kinds of paradigms. So specifically, gradual changes are primarily studied using drifting bandit tasks, where essentially you have multiple actions to choose from, and the amount of points you get for each action drifts gradually over time. Contrastingly, sudden changes are primarily studied using probabilistic bandits, where again you have multiple actions to choose from, but they're rewarded probabilistically, and these probabilities change suddenly over time. So across both of these tasks, essentially you need to integrate over your past observations in order to figure out which action is currently optimal. However, because these types of changes and these paradigms have been studied independently, we don't actually know whether there's a general strategy that can support reacting to both gradual and sudden changes. So within this project, our aim was to see whether we could actually find a general model to support both gradual and sudden changes across these paradigms. And in order to do so, we used a cross-modal task design where essentially we presented a large set of human participants, around 500, with multiple different kinds of bandit tasks. So we presented them with a probabilistic bandit task where they had two actions to choose from, represented by distinct stimuli, and the value of these actions changed suddenly in an uncued manner. We also presented them with drifting bandit tasks where they had 4 actions to choose from, and the value of these actions drifted gradually over time. And we presented them with multiple different instantiations of these drifting bandits and told them that they were independent of one another, and this was always indicated by a change in stimuli. So then we added these uncued sudden changes into the drifting bandit task to allow us to see whether a general strategy could support reacting to both these gradual and sudden changes. This also allowed us to compare whether there was a general strategy supporting reacting to uncued sudden changes in probabilistic versus drifting bandits in general. So finally, we also sampled a cued probabilistic bandit task where we made the sudden changes within the probabilistic bandit cued. This allowed us to see whether this addition of uncued sudden changes affected behavior differently across probabilistic versus drifting bandits. And here you can see an example participant's performance, and you can see that they most often choose the optimal action across all of these different tasks. We're back. All right, and so then we wanted to see whether we could fit a single general model in order to capture the behavior across all of these tasks. And to do so, we fit a recurrent neural network model, which has been shown to fit very well to complex behaviors like these. And we trained the model to predict the actions of participants based on their past observations. And so interestingly, when we fit this model to all of the data across all of these different tasks, we found that the fit to individual tasks was the same as if we fit the model to only these individual tasks. So indeed, it does seem like this recurrent neural network could capture a general strategy that supported all of the tasks. Let's see. I can unplug it and replug it in. Oh, it's back. All right. Okay. And so essentially what we wanted to look at next was what this actual general strategy was made up of. But this is a challenging thing to do because recurrent neural networks learn complex dynamics that are hard to interpret. So in order to do this, we used a reduced complexity recurrent neural network where essentially the recurrent information is split into distinct latents that are updated with distinct update rules. And the complexity is limited by additional bottlenecks that limit the amount of latents that we learn and also limit how many latents impact the update rules for each other latent. And when we fit these reduced complexity RNNs to our data, we found that they fit similarly to the recurrent neural network if we had an intermediate bottleneck, and we had much reduced complexity of the dynamics so that we could actually try to interpret them. So within the best fitting model for this intermediate bottleneck, we found that we had 3 latents, where the first 2 latents depended very strongly on participants' choice and reward, and were modulated by latent 3, which was much less dependent directly on participants' choice and rewards. And so next we wanted to look at how latent 3 was modulating latent 1 and latent 2. And essentially we found that latent 3 was varying the update rates of latent 1 and latent 2. More specifically, when latent 3 took on a high value, we got faster updates towards the set point, whereas when latent 3 took on a lower value, we got more slow updates towards the set point. So next we wanted to look at how the scaling of update rates could support behavior across all of these tasks. And essentially first we looked at whether probabilistic and drifting bandit tasks took on different values of latent 3 in general. And we found that this was, in fact, the case. So in drifting tasks, we found that latent 3 was much higher than in probabilistic tasks. And we also found a distinction in values taken on by both latents 1 and 2, which are modulated by latent 3. And so this indicates that in order to support both drifting and probabilistic tasks, essentially there needs to be a difference in the baseline update rates between the 2 distinct tasks. So next we wanted to also look at how the scaling of update rates could support reacting to sudden changes within both of these tasks. And so essentially, following a sudden change where the optimal action also changed, we found that latent 3 increased, and there was a simultaneous increase in the size of updates occurring within latent 1. And this co-occurred with participants readjusting their behavior to now select the new optimal action following the change. So to summarize, it seems that this general strategy that the recurrent neural network learns actually scales the update rate depending on the history of observations. So in order to support drifting and probabilistic bandits, it uses a distinct update rate, and in order to support reacting to sudden changes, you essentially jump to a different update rate until you have readjusted your behavior. So to summarize what I've told you today, we found that a single general strategy could support both gradual and sudden changes across these paradigms, and this general strategy relied on scaling of update rates. More specifically, we found that within the probabilistic task, where observations are generally more volatile, the baseline update rate was lower, whereas in drifting bandit tasks, where the volatility of observations is generally lower and you need to have a higher sensitivity to any changes, the baseline update rate was higher. And independent of the task, when there were sudden unexpected changes, the volatility changed to being higher than usual, and this led to a shift towards a higher update rate. So again, it seems that we can have a model that can support both gradual and sudden changes with a single strategy that relies on scaling of update rates based on the volatility of your history of observations. So thank you to everyone involved in this project, especially Maria and my current lab at Edinburgh for their feedback along the way.
So much. We're going to have time for a question from the audience.
Thanks for the great talk. I was curious, do you think these two kind of change, continuous and sudden change, could be related to unexpected and unexpected uncertainty?
Yes, so I think they can be, and I think about this more in the way of, rather than expected and unexpected uncertainty, it's kind of like how much the changes vary from the expected changes, right? Unexpected uncertainty is kind of a hard thing to quantify. But I definitely think it relates to all those models where essentially you can change your learning rate based on how certain you are that something's occurring, and you need to have kind of a nonlinear prior in order to change your learning rate when there's a larger unexpected change in uncertainty. Yeah. Cool.
Excellent. Let's thank Jessica again. Which brings us to our last speaker of this session, Peiyue from Beijing Normal University. Cool. Thank you so much.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Peiyue, a PhD student. Thank you. A PhD student with Xiaohong Wan at Beijing Normal University. I will be sharing our work on key mechanism of flexible decision making. We call that proactive counterfactual inference. So we know the cognitive flexibility plays an important role in our ability to adapt our behavior in multivariable environment. So here is one classic test. Thank you. Is with cutting cart sorting test, which directly tests our cognitive flexibility in changing hidden rule. So follow this idea, many studies focus on flexible decision making. Prior work has either focused on the relevant and irrelevant information in context-dependent decision making without rule inference, or on the rule inference using single features. So there is a challenge of performing rule inference with both relevant and irrelevant information. Here, the irrelevant information means the features corresponding to the alternative rule. So it could be considered irrelevant to be the current rule. Okay, here is our core research questions. How does the brain enforce the rules in a multivariable environment, especially with both irrelevant and relevant information? And do we make use of the irrelevant information to corresponding to analytic probabilities of an analytic rule? So to answer this, we designed a novel task combining rule inference and perceptual decision drawing fMRI scanning. Here is our task paradigm. Our task paradigm is a rule switch task in which the rule switched around every 10 trials. In the no-Q condition, the rule is hidden, so participants had to enforce the current rule, motion or color rule, and report their rule belief, and then make a choice about a random dose stimulus based on their chosen rule, and they had to make a choice. And the feedback of task choice is dependent on actual rule instead of chosen rule. They then use the feedback to figure out the next rule. And in the Q control condition, the rule was given to them. So, okay, here is the behavior data. On the one hand, we found that the participant choice was affected by the task irrelevant information. However, the irrelevant information support predicting rule. On the other hand, we found that stronger rule belief enhanced task performance, suggesting rule belief may modulate the information processing. In summary, the participants seemed to seek irrelevant information for rule inference. This process is modulated by the rule belief, we guess. So first, we asked, does the brain actually represent irrelevant information? The answer is yes. The brain lets in the irrelevant information when the environment is uncertain in terms of the no-Q condition. And it brings us to next question. Does our belief about rule actually change the processing of relevant and irrelevant information? Okay, so we turn to the rule belief. We found the activity of the DACC tracks the participant rule belief, and this signal is related to both relevant and irrelevant information. And we can detail how the rule belief to modulate irrelevant and relevant information. We found that the high rule belief leads to stronger representation of relevant information and weaker representation of irrelevant information. And it also modulates the functional connectivity from DACC to corresponding visual areas. This indicates our rule belief tell our brain how to regulate information flow and proactive collecting irrelevant information to do counterfactual inference for rule inference, and especially when rule belief is low. Okay, but why does the brain adopt this strategy? We suggest our results could be explained attention splitting process with limited cognitive resource. That means trade-off collecting the relevant information and irrelevant information. We trained RNs with the attention bottleneck as a normative model to want to explain its process. The network has two modules. A decision module means to make a choice, and the inference module that uses the decision information to do rule inference and provide attention for the decision module. And in the Q condition, we do not need attention and rule inference. Okay, so we can see the model successfully replicates our human behaviors, suggesting a similar normative attention splitting strategy in human and trained models. And to explain why task choice was not affect irrelevant information, we looked deeper into the decision module. We found two distinct groups of neurons that were tuned to different rule features, and they inhibit each other. Rule inputs both the relevant relevant neuron, and inhibit the irrelevant group neuron. And importantly, we found the dimensionality reduction shows that there are both the accumulation of the relevant information and irrelevant information. It suggests the model make a parallel decision making to provide irrelevant alternative evidence for rule inference. So that the irrelevant information influences the rule, but not the task performance. And through the ablation studies removing attention bottleneck, of course, the performance of the model improved without the countering the irrelevant information and relevant information. But we want to point out, if we removing irrelevant information for inference module, we found the model's attention to irrelevant also weakened. That means the irrelevant information in rule inference with limited cognitive source lead to attention splitting. Okay, finally, if we look at the human data and models data sorting by the ground truth, we found their choice pattern like the animals. the task performance are shaped by both relevant and irrelevant information. So there is a last question. Is proactive counterfactual inference across human and animals? We don't know, maybe we can more time to explore this question. Okay, so finally, there is to summarize, there are three key take-home the message. The first, flexible decision-making is proactive. The brain brings the what-if simulation, transforming current irrelevant information into the next useful clues. And second, DCC is the central hub for its process. It acts as a belief monitor and the attention modulator. And finally, our model suggests these results reflect a normative process of proactive counterfactual inference with the constraints of attention bottleneck. Okay, so thanks for your attention.
Thank you for your talk. We again have time for a question from the audience. Oh, up there.
Hey, thanks for the talk. Was there any reaction time differences between the two trials?
Sorry.
The two kinds of trials?
I'm not here.
Was there any response time changes? Like one of the trials had a longer response time, generally across the participants, compared to the other kind of trial?
Sorry, little noise. I can't.
Okay, so was there any response time changes between the two kinds of trials? Like one of the trials had always longer response time compared to the other one. Because what I'm asking is the DACC, or in your case the dorsomedial PFC, that comes more when there's a change in kinds of responses you have to make. Like one trial is always longer, one trial is always shorter. So there's some changes in the response strategy used rather than the belief in the rule inference, so to speak.
I think our results shows that the rule belief can modulate the information processing. And if we use the irrelevant information to alternative rule inference, we can see its positive effect for the rule switching. So I think it's necessary for the irrelevant information. Yes.
I didn't see the response time plots, that's why I'm asking, but yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
Let's thank Peiyue again. So that brings us to the end of the session. In this room, we are going to continue with the neural and cognitive mechanisms of social behavior. And with that, thanks to all the speakers of this session once more.